Welcome to the future.
More and more mouths to feed, but where will the food come from? Can science provide the answers? The future of food under the microscope.
We've got the future covered.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to New York and speak with Danny Schechter, the news dissector. Danny, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Hey, pleasure, Max. Happy Thanksgiving.
Danny Schechter, you made a film and a book called Plunder, The Crime of Our Time. Everything you discussed is coming true. Recently, Judge Rakoff, for example, said the SEC settlements with Bank of America and Citigroup were an abomination, but that he, as a federal judge, had no authority to do anything about it. Your thoughts?
Well, this is the whole problem. We still haven't had an effective investigation on any level of fraud on Wall Street. There's been a couple of prosecutions, mostly of minor players. Another Madoff trader has now been basically convicted and being sentenced to 40 years. But basically, the people in the big banks who engaged in the subprime lending scandals and the leveraging and all of this have been able to create settlements and have their companies pay off the government in lieu of trials that would send CEOs to jail. And this is one of the blatant problems that inspire movements like Occupy Wall Street and anger Americans across the spectrum who are just furious at this abomination of justice, to use the judge's word. Now there's the whole question of MF Global, the company that fell apart under the leadership of former New Jersey governor and Goldman Sachs chief, John Corzine. Apparently it said $600 million was missing. Now they're saying $1.2 billion is missing. Apparently in their last days they took customer money, which they're not allowed to do, to help pay off some of the debts that they had to European banks and the like. And this is being investigated by the FBI right now. There's going to be a congressional probe of it, but it's become a partisan matter, in part because Corzine, of course, was a Democratic governor. So the Republicans are up in arms about this one, but as by and large are supporting Wall Street. And in fact, Republican Party executives have denounced Occupy Wall Street, saying it's the wrong target. You know, you should focus on the Congress, i.e. focus on Democrats. So it's around and around we go. And no real breakthroughs seem to be in sight, but this movement is still picking up steam. According to media monitors last week, Occupy Wall Street had its most media ever, largely because of the police crackdown, which now in the minds of many has been orchestrated by support from the government. Particularly the Department of Homeland Security has been meeting with local cities. They've been providing all sorts of quote, non-lethal policing tools, and the consequence is there have been more arrests, like the incident that outraged the world at the University of California in Davis, where young people who were sitting down nonviolently were pepper sprayed. Now the police that did it have been put on leave, but these kinds of outrages continue, and they continue basically to grow the movement by getting more sympathy for the activists.
Of course, Danny Schechter, during the 1960s, the anti-war movement, we had the Kent State moment when students at Kent State were gunned down. This galvanized the anti-war movement and pushed the momentum toward the success of that movement. Have we had the Kent State moment yet with the Occupy movement? The pepper spraying? Go ahead.
Today there was a report of the first fatality in Seattle, where a woman had a miscarriage after being hit by the police, lost her child. You know, a situation of a growing confrontation and growing violence by the police. And, you know, the question is, to what degree is the Obama administration directly implicated in all of this? The president himself was challenged in New Hampshire at a political appearance yesterday. He was what they call mic-checked. This is the way in which the movement, you know, challenges him by one person saying mic check, another saying mic check, and then they repeat their questions. And they did this at a political meeting in New Hampshire. So this is clearly not a movement that's partisan, but a movement for justice, economic justice.
When I go back to 2008 and Obama took over the presidency, his idea was that we can't look back, we can't prosecute the banksters, we have to look forward. And John Corzine, who was mentioned as a possible Treasury Secretary at the time, and up until even a few months ago by Vice President of the United States as a possible Treasury Secretary nomination, Joe Biden, was there a big mistake there in not prosecuting the banksters and letting them, because they want to come back and steal more? Hank Greenberg now, he wasn't prosecuted or thrown in jail for his lying, cheating, and stealing. Now he wants to come back and sue the government for billions more.
Yeah, I mean, Max, I think this has been a big mistake because it feeds the perception and the real perception, the actual reality of a lack of economic justice. That somebody who gets arrested for stealing a Coca-Cola from a grocery store is prosecuted. Somebody who actually engaged in the looting of their own companies and their own banks through giant bonus schemes and compensation and the like, these people are not even considered subjects of criminal investigations. So we have a precedent in this country back at the S&L crisis where over 1,000, I think 1,700 banksters went to jail. There were criminal referrals that were put forward by regulators. In this case, there have been virtually none. And this is something that I think has kept the government's credibility very low in the eyes of most people who've been following this.
Recently, Freddie Mac cut off support for Stephen J. Baum, one of the biggest mortgage brokers in the industry. As a result, they've had to declare bankruptcy and go out of business, and now all the employees are on the street. These are the same people who dressed up like the homeless people they made homeless a year before at a Halloween party. And now this Baum character wants sympathy. He says, "Oh, woe is me. Why are you attacking me?" Is that justified, or is he just crying big, fat alligator tears?
I mean, he's alleged to have run what's called a foreclosure mill. You know, he was basically serving the banks and getting people out of their homes that the banks claim they owned. In some cases, the banks didn't even own these homes, but they foreclosed anyway. And judges who are just rubber stamping these applications for foreclosure because they're political appointees just, signed these foreclosure orders, and people were thrown out of their homes. But he was so, egregious in the way he did it. And it was so outrageous when this party, came to light of mocking the people he was throwing out, that the government really cracked down on him. In other words, you have to be really outrageously bad to get the attention, of the prosecutors and the regulators. But, the whole housing bubble basically is now a housing muddle. There's no real breakthrough there. The industry is, basically in the toilet, and we have a situation where there are many people who engaged in direct, outright, provable fraud that have not been prosecuted.
Danny Schechter, let me ask you, there's now 200,000 being laid off on Wall Street, so the Occupy movement is very successful in getting these banksters out of the front line. Now, do you think that they're going to join the Occupy movement at this stage, understanding that their predicament, or are they still in denial?
Well, let's understand something. Wall Street has occupied America for a long, long time. This movement is challenging that occupation with another occupation, which is under attack by the New York City police and a realty company named Brookfield Properties, whose board the mayor's girlfriend sits, as well as, I'm told, Joe Biden's son is an attorney for this company. So, the fact that Wall Street is doing a better job of actually collapsing than the Occupy movement is doing and forcing them to collapse is interesting in itself. It's their own, karma, basically, that's gotten them. Their practices have been, not just questionably legal, but, ineffective, and have led to a whole financial collapse. So, the Occupy movement isn't gloating about this. They're still looking for regulators to try to do their job and prosecutors to do their job. They're still pursuing justice to try to get money, big money, out of politics. And this movement, I believe, is really inspiring the whole world. I mean, there have been 1,000 cities have had protests in support of Occupy Wall Street, and the objectives, even though they haven't even spelled them out, people get it, Occupy Wall Street, it's about time is the reaction of a lot of people in New York. And so the popularity of the movement has grown, even though the movement is under attack and is not even allowed, to occupy a half an acre of a park in New York City.
Danny Schechter, the anonymous group, the hacktivist online group Anonymous, recently said or suggested that they were going to start their own hedge fund, and as the banking industry implodes, they would be selling shares short and profiting from the collapse as we see risk returning to the operations of these banks that, for all intents and purposes, have been operating with zero risk for the past 10 to 15 years, thanks to derivatives and other hedging strategies. Do you think this is a good idea for hacktivist groups like Anonymous to start their own hedge fund and fight fire with fire? What do you think?
I think there's a lot of creative tactics. Some have been successful, some have failed, some have actually succeeded despite failure. In other words, 700 people get arrested on the Brooklyn Bridge. That's a failure. They didn't get across the bridge, but it's a success because it led, to a doubling of their support in New York City because of the police brutality and abuse, which was just so clear. So, will Anonymous be successful as hedge fund people? I don't know. The hedge funds, some of them have been very successful, but many haven't. I think there's a lot of different imaginative tactics being adopted. I mean, Anonymous is not really part of this movement. They're supporting it. But the movement itself is trying to codify its demands and political program. The basic thrust of it seems, Max, to occupy the mainstream. They want to not just reach people who agree with them. They want to reach out to all kinds of people, unemployed workers, victims of student debt, where students can't afford to stay in school, people who are being foreclosed upon and the like. And there are millions of people in that situation. I mean, there are a lot of studies that are showing that 45% of the people can't afford to pay their bills. I mean, we're in a bad situation that seems to be getting worse. And at least this movement is articulating the frustrations and the feelings of people who we haven't heard from before. Remember, up until 6 months ago, the whole debate in America, 3 months ago, was all about deficits. Cut, 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 cut. In Europe, austerity was the religious mantra of the day. Now, economic justice as an issue is being put on the agenda thanks to Occupy Wall Street. You got to give them credit to that.
So, Danny Schechter, how can people reach you and catch up with what you're up to?
You can find out more about my book about financial crime and my film Plunder at plunderthecrimeofourtime.com, plunderthecrimeofourtime.com, and I can be reached at dissector@mediachannel.org. Thanks, Max.
All right, fantastic. Danny Schechter for being on the Keiser Report. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Danny Schechter, the news dissector. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. You can follow us at Keiser Report on both Twitter and Facebook. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.